Hello, everyone. My name is Eva Borgwardt, and I'm a co-chair of J Street U Stanford. In a political moment that's felt so turbulent and uncertain, it's been so inspiring and necessary to join with all of you this weekend. Many of the events of the past week have been genuinely scary for the Jewish and Muslim communities in a way that's felt almost surreal. Today alone, there were 16 new bomb threats at JCCs across the country. On Friday, there was an arson attack at a mosque in Tampa. And this is not to mention the desecration of Jewish cemeteries in Philadelphia and my home community of St. Louis. But in such a genuinely scary moment, we're also seeing the Jewish and Muslim communities showing up for each other in really incredible ways. The Muslim community raised funds to repair the damaged cemeteries. And in the wake of Trump's anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant executive order, the Jewish community has mobilized in a way that I have never seen in my lifetime. I was recently at one of the sister protests for the highest national day of Jewish action for refugees in Mountain View, California, with members of my synagogue, and many of these people were at their first protest ever. These were the same people I grew up with. They'd been in the congregation at my bat mitzvah, but never had I seen them mobilize like this. Everyone was singing and praying and clapping, and people were holding up photos of their immigrant ancestors. This one woman next to me was holding up 2 photographs, still literally in their frames, that she'd just taken from her coffee table moments before she left the house. I'd never heard of or seen most of these people's stories before, but there's no shortage of Jews who have family stories of relatives fleeing persecution. And now we had the power to do something about it when it was happening to someone else. I was so proud of my community. In the car on the way back, I thought about another time that I'd felt that way. It was August 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, and I was handing out water by the side of a march for racial justice and for Black lives, also with a group from my synagogue. I knew then, too, that the Jewish values I was raised with were what was driving us to stand up for social justice and equal rights. But then, in that march, a banner that said "Free Palestine" went by. And I felt this ripple of discomfort go through all of the other Jews around me. And people started looking at the floor, and someone said, "Oh, it's a shame that had to be there," as if it had cast a shadow over the entire demonstration. I remember feeling torn in two, because on the one hand, I shared a lot of their discomfort. Free Palestine felt like it cut Israelis and those who support them out of the picture. But on the other hand, I saw the parallel that was being drawn. Black communities were facing a militarized police force, while Palestinians under occupation were facing a military charged with policing. They were trading tips on Twitter about how to deal with tear gas. So I remember thinking, while the circumstances are different, don't the values that lead us to stand up against injustice in Ferguson also lead us to do the same thing in the West Bank? We must be able to value and support lives on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Stand up for the safety and future of Israelis while recognizing the suffering and injustice caused by conflict and occupation. And actually, this is genuinely what it means to stay true to the teachings of our tradition. That's ultimately why I joined J Street U. Last fall, a group of us from J Street U at Stanford, during Sukkot, slept in a sukkah in the middle of campus to oppose the demolition of the West Bank Palestinian village of Susia. We were using the holidays theme of temporary shelter to protest and call attention to home demolitions, which are still endangering Palestinian communities and families. I think it was the first time any of us had actually obeyed the commandment to dwell overnight in a sukkah. I'm in J Street U because that was what it felt like to apply the same values to Israel and its challenges that I apply in literally all other aspects of my life. As I see this political awakening and this really exciting surge in activism in Jewish and pro-Israel communities across the country, I know that they too can apply their values to the struggle for peace and to Israel's future. They don't need to check them at the door. The alternative will not work. We can't sweep the Israeli-Palestinian conflict under the rug or say, oh, it's a shame that had to be there, when our neighbors and coalition partners hold up a sign about Palestinian rights. We know better. We know that just as so much of what the Trump administration does is unacceptable, 50 years of occupation and conflict is also unacceptable. We know that we can fight for Israeli democracy like we fight for American democracy. We know that we can stand up for the rights of Palestinians in the same way that we stand up for the rights of American Muslims and in the way that American Muslims have been standing up for our rights. We know that we can oppose home demolitions and occupation with the same determination and conviction with which we oppose a refugee ban. As pro-Israel, pro-peace Americans, as Jews and non-Jews, we know what we are called upon to do. So in the weeks and months ahead, I'm excited to work with all of you and with many of the Jewish communal leaders who we are about to hear from to live up to our values and fight for what is right. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Editor-at-Large from the Forward, J.J. Goldberg.
Am I on? Yeah. Well, on this fine afternoon, I guess it is already. Dearly beloved, oh no, that's the wrong sheet. I guess we've got it straight by now. We've been doing this for a day and a half. We're at a kind of an extraordinary moment in American history. And because of what America is, it's an extraordinary moment in Jewish history. It's an extraordinary moment in world history. Because what happens here echoes around the world. The thing that has been bothering me for the last few weeks is that this is a very different problem from what progressives and liberals have faced before. And yet, we are addressing it with the same answers we used before. We're out there fighting for immigrant rights, for LGBT rights, for racial justice, for the things we fought for before, against a new threat, I think. But we're going to talk about this. On the other hand, if we don't fight for those things, what are we? So we face a dilemma. And as often happens in a dilemma, we're kind of in a funk. My father used to tell me, when you feel depressed, just remember, depression is a way of feeling sad. Plug into the sadness and then deal with that. Having said that, we've got a panel here that's going to be talking about these issues of what does the American Jewish community do now? How is it challenged? How does it work together? How do we work as individual parts? We've got with us today 5 extraordinary people. First of all, Barry Schrage is the president and CEO of the Combined Jewish Philanthropies of Boston. I think they're all coming out together at the end. Nancy Kaufman, who is the president and CEO, or the executive director, I'm sorry, of the National Council of Jewish Women. I'd like to point out that the National Council of Jewish Women and the Combined Jewish Philanthropies were both formed in the same year, 1895. We've got Daniel Sokach, who is the CEO of the New Israel Fund. Got Brooke Davies, who is the chair of the National Board of J Street U. And we have Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who is the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. So if I could ask them all to come out here. So again, on my left, Nancy Kaufman, Barry Schrag, Daniel Sokach, Brooke Davies, and Jonah Pesner. Well, let's get to it. I'm going to start off down at the end there with Jonah. It's often said that American Jews are most comfortable in their skins as political people when the American government and the Israeli government are on the same page. So now we've got what we asked for. How are we feeling right now?
You know, if Jewish history has taught us anything, JJ, it's that regimes come and go, but Jewish values are enduring and eternal. So for me, the premise of the question may or may not be correct. I'm with Eva. What I am seeing at the grassroots level across our country is congregations that are organizing, mobilizing, and they are literally marching in the footsteps of the prophets who came thousands of years before them to do what you said earlier, which is to be for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. We are for the refugee. We are for the LGBT community. We are for Black lives. We are for all lives. We are for people with disabilities who are going to suffer under this health reform, whatever it's going to be, and we are for Muslim brothers and sisters, and we are for the Jewish community because that's what Jews do, and we will do it, and we will get through this as we have gotten through thousands of years of Jewish history.
Nancy, does the Trump presidency represent a break with American political tradition? Or did the pendulum just swing from the Democrats to the Republicans? Is this a standard issue Republican presidency, or is it something new and different in American history?
I don't think that any of us who care about democracy and Jewish values, to pick up on my dear friend Jonah's important statement, can possibly look at this election and so far this presidency as business as usual. I think we have to understand that something very different happened, that it was the victory of reality TV over network TV, that this president did not win this election, in fact, lost by more votes than anyone in the history of the country. And I think if we think it's business, if we act like it's business as usual or Republicans on steroids, we will miss the enormous and serious efforts of Bannonism to deconstruct what has been traditionally our two-party system and our American democracy. So I think it is not business as usual.
Ouch. Brooke, how do you see the role of the Jewish community at this moment here? Do we have a choice? Or is it a commandment at this point that we rise up?
Sure. I just want to start off by saying thank you, Eva, and thank you to all of our panelists and to you, JJ, for coming out and speaking with us tonight. And thank you to all of you for coming out as well. I think our choice is very clear, and if I could bring it to Israel for a minute, that would be great. I think we have a choice of a two-state or solution or a one-state reality. And to me, I feel like personally I have no choice but to stand up and to defend a two-state solution. And domestically, there are incredible things that the people on the stage are doing. I know that NCJW was an incredible force in organizing the Women's March, and the RAC has done amazing work standing up against David Friedman. I would say that I am incredibly proud of the response to the refugee ban that the Trump administration put out from the Jewish community, but I would say that just as democracy is being threatened in the US, so is democracy being threatened in Israel, and just as this Jewish community has built an enormous amount of power in the US, we have an enormous amount of power in Israel, and with that comes a responsibility to do something. So the choice to me is clear. If we want to see Israel slide into a one-state reality, if we want to see continual violence and continual strife and continual insecurity, that's just going to happen. But if we want a two-state solution and if we want to make that choice, it's on all of us to make that happen.
Daniel, what does that mean, all of us? How does the Jewish community, in practical terms, what is the Jewish community in this battle right now?
Well, first of all, I agree with Brooke that the challenges to democracy and democratic fiber in our country that we're now experiencing seemingly very suddenly have a lot of echoes from what has been happening in Israel this last decade or so, and of course, that's the work of the New Israel Fund to try to push back against that erosion of democracy in Israel, which is what I believe we're called to do here. Now, as for whether or not there's a Jewish community, I've felt for quite some time that we are actually Jewish communities. And I know that that's an unpopular thing to say sometimes, and I appreciate the efforts of great servants of the Jewish people and the Jewish community, some of whom are on this stage, to try to build a big tent that we can all fit under. And I think that there are places and times where that's appropriate. I think now, when you have 76% of the Jewish community voting emphatically not for Donald Trump, when you have a set of domestic policies that challenge and threaten deeply held values in the American Jewish community, we have a real problem. And the problem is exacerbated by the fact that for a long time now, the unelected leadership of the American Jewish community, the American Jewish communal establishment, as our friend Ruth Messenger calls it, has built an American Jewish identity predicated on a certain kind of relationship to Israel. And I'm struck by what Eva said in her introduction earlier. You know, we have been told as a community that the biggest challenges to our values and to our safety come from those who are critical of Israel, right? Come from the BDS movement, right? Which is we are told, and I believe actually, is antithetical to what we stand for, certainly at the New Israel Fund and at J Street, but we're told is sort of a camouflage for anti-Semitism. And we're told that people, for example, like Linda Sarsour, who was one of the planners of the Women's March that Eva mentioned, a Palestinian-American woman, is sort of an enemy of our people as a result of her criticism of Israel, and that we shouldn't be in the same tent with her. And yet, it was Linda Sarsour who invited Rabbi Sharon Brous, who's here with us today, one of the great prophetic voices in the American Jewish community, a liberal, a proud out liberal Zionist, to be the Jewish speaker at that event. It was Linda Sarsour who led the drive to raise over $100,000 for the Jewish community. And while our Jewish community has been so focused on this, we've actually let actual anti-Semites access the West Wing. And now there is a wave of anti-Semitism, and I believe that we as a community, wherever we sit on that communal spectrum, are called to stand up with our brothers and sisters and other vulnerable communities in this country. And to that end, as Eva also mentioned earlier, there's a great effort that New Israel Fund is a part of, Jews and Muslims Resist Together, raising money for the mosque arson in Tampa. That, if there's hope for the future, that's the hope for the future.
Just as a bit of context, in the last election, Trump got 24% of the Jewish vote, Hillary Clinton got 71% of the Jewish vote, and the other 5% went to the third-party candidates, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. If we count back to the last 14 elections, roughly from the time that today's retirees could first vote, 1964. There have been 14 elections since 1964. By the way, 1964 is also the last time that a Democrat won a majority of the white vote. Trump comes in 7th of the 14 among Republicans getting a share of the Jewish vote. In other words, 9 did worse. What's the
math is beyond me.
7 did worse than him. 7 did worse than him, and 7 did better than him. He came to right in the middle. Hillary Clinton, at 71%, comes in 9th among Democrats because the Jill Stein, Gary Johnson took away. So that this was not, in many ways, it's a more ambivalent Jewish vote than we usually see. Now, Barry, you head an organization that tries to reach the entire community. I guess we all do.
Such is my blessing.
I guess we all do that, but what are the limits on the community as a whole acting? What can it do and what can't it do in a situation like this?
Well, I think I need to say first that I was uncomfortable with what Eva said. There are differences here. To talk about 50 years or 70 years of oppression, it doesn't give a lot of space to real heroes who tried to make the peace happen, to various peace processes that were rejected by the Palestinians, to all the attempts that were made to actually create a two-state solution. It's not going to, the real audience here is not the people in this room. It's the people of Israel. We alienate the people of Israel. We have no hope of creating the two-state solution that most of us strongly believe in. So, part of the problem in understanding the Trump phenomenon, we better be taking a look at the way we talk to each other as Americans. We better be looking in the mirror a little bit. And if we allow the mistakes that we made in terms of creating the political situation that we have right now, the incredible polarization, to destroy our community, it's another problem. So look, it strikes me that one of the problems here is the deterioration of the institutions that used to run American life. Those no longer have any credibility. And what needs to replace them are mediating institutions, face-to-face organizations like synagogues. Now, in every synagogue, there are going to be some people who like Mr. Trump. And in our community, there are some people who like Mr. Trump. Or at least, let me say this, they didn't vote for him. They voted for Hillary. And they certainly reject a lot of what's happening with people who are being hunted down in the street because they're undocumented immigrants. But on the other hand, they take some joy for the first time in seeing a United Nations ambassador actually say that the fact that Israel is criticized 80 times when Iran is criticized once was a horror show. There are American Jews who love social justice, but who don't want to see Israel continuously demonized. They also understand the dangers of a one-state solution. But to say to our brothers and sisters in Israel that theirs is an unmitigated history of oppression, it's not right. And it won't get you anywhere with the people of Israel, who we need to make our friends. Did I not answer your question? I probably didn't. Ask me again.
Well, we're going to get to everything, but I want to emphasize that last point you made. There are two separate questions in any political decision. Is it right, and will it get you anywhere? And we sometimes confuse one with the other, but they're both urgent necessities. Now, Jonah, you've also got a movement behind you that represents a broad diversity of views and ideas. How far can the rabbi go, a pulpit rabbi, in leading his congregation against what the people on this stage see as a problem when there are going to be... Is it okay for the majority to act when the minority doesn't agree in the Jewish community?
What was so beautiful about the way Barry painted the picture of a synagogue, he called it a mediating institution, which is a face-to-face community. So what does that mean? To be a mediating institution means that we are the defense against the excesses of a society. When a society fails to care for the widow or the orphan and the stranger, The synagogue is one of those institutions that holds a society or community accountable. And sometimes we do that in our local community, and sometimes we do that with our beloved Israel. That's our job. But by being face-to-face, it means we can actually be the model of the kind of civil, sacred community that we believe in. In other words, the way that we talk about this stuff inside the walls of our congregations and our communities matters as much as the things that we're fighting for. And so, the reform movement is on record in the last month alone on any number of issues, whether it's opposing the nomination of David Friedman as ambassador, or it was the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions to be Attorney General, or the refugee ban, or the Muslim ban, or whatever. But we know that making those bold decisions must go through a sacred process where first we are located in our enduring Jewish values. These are not political, partisan positions. They have to come from and through the text. And that text has to be studied in sacred dialogue with the dissenting opinion. Because we should remember, the Talmud always publishes the minority. That said, I like to remind people, though Hillel and Shammai disagreed about how to light the Hanukkah, we still light the Hanukkah. So at the end of the day, we may disagree about where we stand on Israel, we may disagree about this presidency. We need a two-state solution. We need peace and justice and security for Israel and for Palestine, and we need to fight for that, because that's what it is to do what it is to be a prophetic movement of the Jewish people.
What's right and how do we get there? You had an organization, Nancy, that it sort of straddles the two types, the ideological but also the broad community umbrella. How do you balance that within your organization?
Well, thank you, JJ. And I do want to correct you that actually NCJW was founded in 1893, 2 years before the first federal states.
I just want to point out that you just heard fake news. That was fake news.
On the other hand, in my defense, Boston Federation was the first federation in the country.
Absolutely.
And NCJW was not the first Jewish women's organization.
And I was proud to work at with Barry for 20 years in Boston as JCRC director. I want to talk about what I think we need is a new paradigm, because I think that those of you who might have gone to the session, Women's Leadership Forum session yesterday, where my dear friend and colleague Hamutal Gori spoke about the March of Hope and the role of women. I think we have, if you look at what's happening in the United States and Israel, you have a resurgence of women's voices, thank God. And I think it's time for a resurgence of women's voices.
Amen to that.
I think that the thing we understand as women is that we have a spiritual and a moral obligation to leave this world for our children and grandchildren better than what we found. And quite frankly, all of our many leaders within and outside the Jewish community, particularly at the political level, have kind of screwed up to a fare thee well. And the example is probably most visible in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So one of the things that we're working towards and working on with a number of other organizations is actually trying to make UN Resolution 1325 a reality. It was passed in the year 2000 by the United Nations. It was accepted in Israel in 2005 and has never been accepted by the United States. There's never been a plan in the United States. But it's to have the role of women's voices lifted up. And you saw what happened. The Women's March was rather an unbelievable happening. And one of the things we did as National Council of Jewish Women was that we decided that not only would we officially sponsor it once we did our due diligence around questions that we had and concerns we had, but that we would sit on the policy committee because we did not want it to become an anti-Israel bashing opportunity, which it did not, and the organizers stayed true to their commitment. And that we would, unlike marches previously that many of us participated in, that we would try to organize the Jewish community to march and be together as a Jewish community. And I want to thank everybody in this room and all my colleagues across the country who came together, many, many, many Jewish organizations who came together and marched together as Jewish organizations. So I guess what I want to say is that to me the biggest barriers right now are indifference, not caring about the the role of Israel and being pro-peace and pro-Israel. And as my dear friend Ruth Messenger said after the election, despair is not a strategy. So I think what we need to do is we need to stand up, speak out, and be present. And I happen to think, maybe a little biased, that as women, we have a unique opportunity at this time in history to really make our voices heard, perhaps in some new ways, because the way we engage is a little bit different than I think the traditional engagement in this framework. So a new paradigm.
At the risk of pigeonholing and stereotyping, we've got one person here who works with kids on campus.
Young people.
Young people.
Our kids will be upset.
So the question is, the Jewish organizations, the mainstream Jewish organizations that have or haven't performed well, do the people you talk to care about that? Do they follow what the Jewish organizations do? Does anybody speak for the Jewish community?
Sure. Well, let me ask J Street U. J Street U, can you stand up if you notice what the American Jewish establishment does and the actions that they take? Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
There they are. We do. We notice that leadership and we notice the lack of it. And I think for me, I remember I was marching on Washington in the Women's March, and I remember I was marching with Amna Faruqi, who is the president of JSU last year, and I saw Hayes and Ben the Ark, and I was surrounded by an incredible amount of powerful and energetic and exciting women, but that was where I wanted to be. I wanted to be with my community, and I wanted to be with Ben the Ark and Hayes. And that's what I deeply feel. J Street U and the young people are going to be out there. They're going to be marching. They're going to be in the streets. We're going to be thinking about power, and we're going to be thinking about how we can use that power that we have to get closer to a two-state solution. If the American Jews... If the American Jewish establishment wants to join us, that would be great. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah.
You know, JJ, can I just add, you never want to follow a J Street U leader, but I will say, every time I meet with the J Street U leadership, it is like inspirational, motivational, energizing. This is not our future. This is our present, and thank you all for your leadership. Really incredible.
So there are times when the Jewish community is visible as an actor on the public scene, the civil rights movement, Soviet Jewry movement. AIPAC, lobbying for aid to Israel. Everybody notices. I'm wondering whether there is a visible Jewish presence in the, we call it the resistance, the opposition to Trump now, and is there a way we could do it differently, Jonah?
It feels so Jewish to me, it's like incredible. I mean, I just, when you painted the picture earlier of, you know, the folks who descended on the various airports to be with refugees, proudly they wore t-shirts with Jewish insignias. There were rabbis, there were people wearing kippot. It happened that the Union for Reform Judaism's large congregations convention was happening in Dallas. We had more than 100 leaders arrive in Dallas, and instead of going to the hotel, they went straight to the protest. So there were the leaders of the Reform Jewish movement advocating for refugees. To me, this is a Jewish movement, and I would say what's beautiful about it is the way that it is a Jewish movement that is deepening the allyship with folks in the Muslim community, or folks in the immigrant community, or folks in the African American community. It is a beautiful tapestry of the array of God's creatures joining together to make America as beautiful and just and as loving as it can be.
Barry, when you see or hear that sort of militant, proud talk from Jewish liberals today, does it make your job as a kind of a being the glue that holds the community together, is your job easier or harder?
I have the best job in the world. It's definitely easy and terrific, and it's actually a pleasure. That's the truth. But so let's look at it in a slightly different way. So first of all, I do think that we have a major responsibility to hold the community together. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do anything. And that means trying to find the center point where action is pretty nearly universal. So if we asked the community to back a resolution of CJP attacking Donald Trump, it would create nothing but a firestorm of horror. On the other hand, we are now in the process of building a massive fundraising campaign and volunteer service campaign to be out there with undocumented immigrants, helping them to defend their lives and their families.
Great.
Now, when Nancy and I used to work closely together, we tried to avoid things that would destroy the Jewish community, and we focused on volunteer service and on stuff that would bring us together as a community to really make a difference. I'm not interested in dividing the Jewish community. I'm interested in bringing it together around things that 95% of the Jewish community will agree to, because our heart is the heart of the stranger. Because we remember what it felt like to be strangers and slaves, because we remember what our Torah demands of us, and we will do that. But we need to think about the best way to do this in a way that will actually, everything has changed. Even the dialogue around Israel has changed. The idea that there was a great article by, 70 years old, which was basically called Plan B for a two-state solution, where there may be openness, even in this administration, to be thinking in brand new ways about this. There was a problem with talking about over the green line when most Israelis thought that Gilo was not a settlement. Maybe we should be talking about what we need to do outside the blocks. People are suggesting this. Even Mr. Netanyahu suggested this in a kind of a 5-point plan not too long ago. He then backed off. But there's possibility here if we think in brand new ways about what this administration... Look, the old solutions are gone. We better be thinking in new ways about how we take advantage of the opportunities that we actually have left in a way that keeps our Jewish community unified. You know, there was in Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address, he looked at his audience and he said, we are not enemies. We must be friends. He was worried about civil war. He said, let's stay calm and keep our perspective until the better angels of our Constitution reassert themselves. We need a little bit of forbearance here. We need to not demonize. Look, it was wrong to demonize J Street, wrong to demonize those people who want peace. But it's wrong to think that everybody who's not exactly ready today to give up the entire West Bank is some kind of traitor to social justice. It's not true. There's nuance that's required, and this place is a place to do it. You're going to see a lot of talk on campus that won't be positive because of the relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Trump. Maybe the job of J Street U is to say, we love Israel. We adore Israel. We are worried about every single Jewish life. We adore it. Our primary responsibility is to the Jewish people and the Jewish community. That's what we're here for. Now, that doesn't absolve us for responsibility to caring about other human beings. But somebody's going to have to speak up and say, this does not represent the spirit of Israel necessarily. There's more to this. Love of the Jewish people is at the core of what actually most people, I know the J Street U people. We talk to them all the time. Love of the Jewish people is at their heart. Love of the state of Israel is at their heart. We need a way to be able to translate that in very, very difficult times without somehow losing our perspective and ending up creating greater polarization than we started with.
Can I respond?
Daniel, I've got a question for you, but you can answer whichever question you want. But
I was going to do that anyway.
TV training for public speakers. The emergence of a sort of a Bush, Trump-Netanyahu axis. so to speak, a Trump version of republicanism and a Netanyahu-Bennett-Lieberman version of Likudism. It changes things at the top. I don't know how deep it goes, but your job, for the job of those who oppose, who stand for peace, who stand to the left of the center line, is it easier or harder to organize now?
Well, look, it's harder, but it's even more urgent. You know, some of you know or saw the news a couple of weeks ago. We had our board meeting in Jerusalem, and one of my deputies, Vice President for Finance and Operations of the New Israel Fund, was detained at Ben Gurion, and we were told when we inquired that she was a national security threat. So my board chair, Talia Sasson, the former state prosecutor of the State of Israel, called up the chief of security at Ben Gurion, and when he told her that she was being detained because she was a national security threat, Talia said, when I worked at the state prosecutor's office, I prosecuted national security threats, and I assure you, a middle-aged liberal Jewish woman from San Francisco who ran the Jewish Federation for 5 years is not a security threat to the State of Israel. Now, whether or not that was a fluke or a harbinger of things to come, and I would argue that there is an atmosphere in Israel that, in which we have seen a raft of anti-democratic bills over the last 7-8 years sort of rise and fall, and it's in rising form right now. There is an atmosphere in Israel where those who dissent from the party line of those in power, right, are demonized and marginalized and accused of being all the things that Barry correctly worries about happening to Jews who dissent on either side of the aisle in this country. It's a process that is well advanced in the State of Israel, and it's something that I think needs to concern all of us. And what the New Israel Fund stands for is the notion that in Israel that is both a homeland for the Jewish people and also an open, democratic, equal society for all of its citizens is the only Israel that has a chance of surviving and achieving the two-state solution that we're also concerned about. But we don't do ourselves any favors if we pretend that what's happening in Israel, A, is not happening in Israel, right? And B, if we pretend that that can't happen here. And I want to say something again. I really do appreciate you have the most sincere concern about building a tent for the Jewish people of anyone I know. But the government of Israel, the people in charge of Israeli policy, they don't agree with limiting building in the settlement blocks. That's not, even if we could establish a consensus, and in this room I don't think we could, right? They're annexationists in the wings in the government of Israel. And again, if we ignore at our peril, I believe, you know, we've seen a host of these political cartoons. You know, how long do we have to be told by, you know, the one with the wolf and the sheep? And the sheep says, well, he says he's going to eat all the sheep if he wins, they say, of the political poster of the wolf. And the other one says, I'm voting for him, right? So, I mean, if we don't listen to the people in charge of Israel right now and the people in charge of our government right now and believe that they are sincere about what they want to do, I think we're making an epic historical mistake. And the call to us is to figure out the most effective ways of resisting that agenda.
I want to flip it back to the grassroots and the importance of the grassroots. And I come from the grassroots. I worked in the grassroots. I was trained in organizing, and I believe in the grassroots. I believe in the grassroots in the United States. I believe in the grassroots in Israel, and it's why I love J Street U, because you are the grassroots. So
we love you.
You know, you are the grassroots. So I think that we spend so much time focusing on who's up there.
Yes.
Mainly the boys who are up there, and we forget about the grassroots. One of the things that the Women's March, you know, which was incredibly well covered in Israeli press, the United States press, felt for, I think, all of us who felt empowered and participated was that the grassroots had a voice. What didn't get as much press was the Women of Hope March that was sponsored by Women Wage Peace back over Sukkot. The march, we supported, National Council of Jewish Women. It's a movement that's happening in Israel at the grassroots. It's an incredible movement of women who want to make peace across the spectrum. It's transcending politics and religion and ethnicity. And I'd put my money on that building and building a powerful base of support. Because they're not just thinking about Tel Aviv and Haifa, they're thinking about Rahat and Ofakim. And if we don't think about the women who are living there, if we don't think about the economic divide for people, then we're forgetting that there is something that unites people that has to do with the desire for peace, but they need to have the bandwidth to be able to pursue peace. So I guess while we have perhaps governments that we don't fully believe in, support, or feel can lead us, across the divide, that maybe it's time for us to all be investing in the grassroots and building.
We are the pushback.
And
That's right.
Yes.
Can I actually say something? Yeah, I just want to lift up your point of I also deeply believe in the grassroots. From J Street U, I learned community organizing, and that's something that I'm going to hopefully take on for the rest of my life, and I'm deeply grateful for this organization for. I think to respond to your point, Barry, and also to kind of bring this back to a larger conversation around what actually this community and the leaders of this community need to be doing. What's going on campus right now is that J Street U and those in the center on the conversation around Israel, we are being squeezed out. When I have students, Lily Sandberg gave a beautiful story at our student session yesterday where I think the dean of her academics said that she doesn't talk to Zionists, that she doesn't even engage with Zionists, the dean of her academic school, and talk about a power dynamic. I have students, personally myself, the day after the election, a swastika was found in my mailbox, and so I'm being squeezed out on the right as well. That is happening on campus, it's happening across the country, and it's happening to J Street U students, and it's worrying to me. The thing is that I deeply believe in J Street U's ability to do the grassroots organizing that we need to do and to stand up for the two-state solution and to get organized and to build power and to make sure that we actually carve out a center on campus and in this community that actually gets us closer to what all of us want. What I need from this community is to largely give us that space. In the fight against BDS at Northwestern, a few years back, if I recall, all the pro-Israel groups got together. They wrote an alternative resolution in response to a BDS resolution that had come up at Northwestern, and it said in the alternative resolution the word occupation. The Federation in Chicago was not happy about the word occupation being involved in this resolution, and so much pressure was put on these students that the resolution actually dissolved. The coalition that had been built by these pro-Israel students dissolved, and BDS passed at Northwestern. So what I need from this community is not just a helping hand, I also need for you all to let me do my work. That's what I need. Yeah. So I can't tell Lily Sandberg to just go to the dean of her academic studies and say, I am pro-Israel, I love Israel, and you should love Israel too. J Street U needs to be thinking a little bit more strategically and a little bit more pragmatically, and I'm looking forward to helping you all do that as well and have you help me and do that as well. But it's going to come from a little bit more than just saying, I love Israel.
But Jonah, you're in a position heading an organization that works with Washington. Situations like this, like deans who don't want to talk to Zionists. We hear the response from the ZOA, which is to get anti-Zionism outlawed. Is there a middle ground? What should we be working for in terms of the atmosphere on campus? What can we achieve to change this?
Well, I think, first of all, we should hear Brooke and this beautiful picture of what the middle looks like, what the center look like, what the vast majority of American Jews, and I would actually argue Israeli Jews, aspire for. We have a few shrill voices that kind of ground out what is thoughtful and what is reasonable, and I think both Barry and Brooke pointed out, nuance really matters. We have a vision of a Zionism that is democratic, that is authentically rooted in Jewish sources, that is compelling, I think, for most Israelis and most American Jews. What we need to be doing much better is not just telling that story and messaging it, but is really building the institutions, relationship by relationship, federation by federation, J Street U chapter by J Street U chapter, where we come around together around that kind of shared vision and enterprise about what that looks like. And there are some hard conversations that are going to have to happen in the meantime, and people are going to reasonably disagree. I think in Israel, any of us who spend a lot of time in Israel, there is such a yearning for an Israel that is at peace, that is democratic, that respects the rights of minorities, where women have full equality. Most Israelis want all of that. And I think we have to be the amplifying voice of what that picture looks like, and then do the hard work to build the institutions that reflect those values.
That's a good fundraising pitch for New Israel Fund, John.
I like the New Israel Fund just fine.
We heard last night from Akram Hassan, who is a member of the Kulanu Party, a member of Knesset. Kulanu Party was formed by Moshe Kahlon and is in the coalition. And he said his party, which is what, 8 seats in the Knesset? 11. Has, stands for the peace process, but they're in the coalition because of social, economic, class reasons. In fact, there are about a majority of the coalition of 66, but a minority of the Knesset are against a Palestinian state. About 40, 45 members of the Knesset are against it, and about 70 or 75 are for it. So people talk all the time about a democratic, the right of the Israeli people to choose their own leaders. I don't know. We are now in a situation where both Israel and America are united by the fact that they're led by people who lost the election. Practically speaking, what do we do? Is there a strategy to get us from A to B? Why does the majority not win?
Well, so I wanted to pick up on some things that Nancy said and talk about what could be a social or a political strategy to change things. That's really, I think, what we have to be focused on. You know, J Street has tremendously important things to say, but as I've said before, occasionally you have to say something nice about Israel, not just about the problems of Israel, but about what Israel adds and the importance of it. You can't afford to be identified with crazy people at the United Nations for whom every single thing that goes on wrong in the world is Israel's fault. And I know that's not what you believe, and it's not what you... But sometimes, if you're going to have a voice in the American Jewish community, it's important, again, to have a nuanced voice. But even more important, if you think about what Nancy was saying, again, about mediating institutions. So, look, in Israel, it's the same thing as here. You've got 2 big balloons on either side that are totally polarized. But in the middle, there are the kind of organizations that you work with. There are all kinds of mediating and civil and civic organizations. It should be possible for federations and others to provide support. Look, mayors are incredibly important. And the leadership, the future leadership of Israel is going to come from those mayors. What are we doing in those Israeli Arab townships, in those cities? What are we doing with those mayors? There are people, philanthropists in our community that are totally committed to seeing serious change in Israeli society through the support of those kinds of institutions. We're not going to get anywhere by screaming at each other over a huge chasm. What can happen, and this is going to take a lot of thought, this is not an applause line, it's what do we need to do to strengthen those institutions that could truly make a difference. Arab-Israeli organizations, leadership training. Our problem and their problem is certainly in part a gigantic lack of leadership to give leadership to our community and to theirs. There are good things that we can do, but it's got to be in some ways outside the normal political channels. It's communication at the grassroots. It's communication with, like you said, the vast majority of Israelis who want something better. And by the way, I also wouldn't, based on stuff that's been going around, it's pretty clear that there are things that are going on in the United States that are not entirely making Mr. Netanyahu completely happy here. He's worried about the attack from his right. There are new opportunities here, but we have to keep our eyes open for what those he's been staunchly managing to avoid He was against whatever it is, the settlements law, whatever it's, he was against it.
Until he was for it.
Until he was for it, because there was pressure from the right. But what if all the forces are different now? What if we can trigger different kinds of forces to make a difference? Whoever it was who said on this panel, despair is not an option, I think it was Nancy. Despair is not an option. We're still a strong country and a good country, and Israel is still an unbelievable place in so many ways. And if we're going to make it better, we've got to be talking to each other.
This idea of working with organizations and communities in Israel that want change. Can a thing like that happen, Daniel?
Well, things like that are happening.
In fact,
look,
before you go on, you guys, the New Israel Fund, has come under a lot of attack in the last 2-3 years.
5, 6, 7. Yeah.
A concerted campaign to take it down, basically because of an issue out of the dozens you deal with. How do you deal with that? Answer both.
Right. Well, first, NIF has come under consistent attack by an extremist fringe for precisely the same reasons in the Israeli context that Planned Parenthood and the ACLU were under attack in our country. There is no difference, right, between the reasons for those attacks. That's what NIF is and what it represents in Israel. And so the reason we've been under sustained attack is because, in my opinion, for the great silver lining here, because it won't surprise you to learn that I'm a great believer in the power of civil society. And I so appreciated your comments, Nancy, right? Because the governments are going to be what the governments are going to be. But the hope for me is in the people of both of these two countries, right? And for that matter, the Palestinian people, right? Who are not only going to have to hold the line against attempts to erode civil society and democratic norms, but are also going to have to put forward a vision. My favorite quote of the J Street Conference, and there have been some great ones, was from a Merit's MK yesterday, Tammy Zandberg, who said, I believe it was Tammy who said, Martin Luther King had a dream, not a strategy, right? So civil society in Israel, like civil society in the United States, needs to articulate and is articulating a vision of what Israel as a truly shared society can be. And beneath the awful headlines and the attacks on the New Israel Fund and the attacks on B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, again, organizations that are guilty, like the ACLU, of holding a mirror up to Israeli society and saying, is this who we want to be? That is their crime, right? And again, it wasn't that long ago that we in this room remember when the sitting vice president of the United States, Dick Cheney, said that the ACLU was helping the terrorists because of its reportage on what was happening in Iraq and at Gitmo, right? So it's obviously, I believe, a false choice. But beneath those headlines, there are civil society organizations like Sikui, a shared project of Israeli citizens, Arab and Jewish, who are working to create truly shared and truly open public space. And they achieved a monumental victory, not yet implemented, when they were the main architect of a government's plan to provide equal funding in the budgetary process to the Arab-Israeli sector, the Palestinian citizens of Israel sector. So again, the government has not yet implemented this, but this was a huge victory which was brought about not because of the largesse of the Israeli government, right? It wasn't the Israeli government that woke up one morning and said, you know, we ought to sort of give Arab citizens of Israel a fair shake. It was civil society organizations that did that. Just as it wasn't the government of Israel that would up one day and said, you know, it would be great propaganda branding, Hasbara branding, if we treated LGBT folks really well in Israel. It was the LGBTQ movement in Israel that fought for that achievement. So this I think is the great hope. In Israel, for the last 8 years of my tenure at the helm of NIF, the other side, right, of the ideological spectrum has increasingly controlled every lever of power in the state of Israel. And yet, Israeli civil society has held the line. And that's exactly what my hope is here. And the march that we were all talking about, what we saw over the last 5 weeks in this country, I believe and hope is only the beginning of what American civil society is capable of doing here.
Thank you, Daniel, and I want to pick up on both what you and Barry said. In a few weeks, we're going to be having our national gathering in Atlanta, and at our Israel Plenary, we'll be having two amazing women come speak, one from We Power and one from Injaz, one that helps women get elected to municipal positions in the Arab community and in the Ashkenazi and in the Sephardic, the entire spectrum of Israel. And so we'll be lifting that up, and we will be supporting that, because it's about building civil society. I want to take us to, if I can, JJ, just, I'm thinking, here are these amazing people on this panel. I think all of us love Israel, we're pro-Israel, we're pro-peace, and yet somehow we haven't been able to communicate what I think is an agreement, a consensus, that Israel's future is going to depend on a two-state solution, and that's becoming less and less possible. And so I know, Barry, for years you said to me from, I think, when I first began, way back when, you were never a big fan of settlements. I know that for sure. And the question is, when our organizations go to Israel, or could we think about going to Israel together across the spectrum and actually having a fly-in, as we do in Washington, and saying to the Prime Minister, the American Jewish community, not Trump, not the American government, but the American Jewish community is deeply worried about the future of the state of Israel, and we're not going to see it go down the street.
I'm in.
I think, believe me, no, I think that there's, among the people who I know, there's a very large consensus that a one-state solution is an extremely bad idea, and that Israel could limit settlement building, if only to give the world the true sense that Israel really cares about and wants peace. And that would be, and like I said, it could be outside the blocks, it could be, but some sign that says, and yet those same people will say, settlements are not the problem here. The problem has been the rejection of Israel from day one. So we really have to take some of this stuff into account. The New Israel Fund's a wonderful organization, but you know what? Some of the criticism is not the work of far-right wingers who simply hate civil society.
Right, it's the work of propaganda by far-right wingers who hate civil society that people believe in this country.
I think you can.
Chair recognizes Barry.
I think demonizing people on the other side is an extremely bad idea. I think that lots of Israelis do not like the idea that they're moving toward a one-state solution, which is extremely dangerous. But there are some organizations that you have that also give people the impression that the problem here isn't the one-state solution. The problem is Israeli soldiers that are violating every decent human law that we have. That's a problem for Israelis, and because most of their kids are in the service, and they're the ones that have to fight, they're the ones that have to either decide whether to make a move or...
What did you say?
I've been waiting for that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I think that we again need to be thinking about what the people of Israel are actually thinking and what they care about and who they are if we're really going to make this case. But I think that the key to this really is listening to each other and trying to apply some nuance to the arguments that we're making about what's going on over there. Look, there are many, many, many of my most important donors that would love to go over to Israel and make the case. They do not want to be identified with United Nations attacks on Israel. They don't want to be identified with what they view as completely unfair attacks on Israel. They worry about the future. Lots of people do. Building a coalition that's prepared to talk about what needs to be done in a way that Mr. Netanyahu can understand, that feeds into what his interests are as well and what the interests of the people of Israel are. This is a new time, an extremely dangerous time, a time when there are going to be tipping points all over the place. We need to think about this very, very carefully and not be talking to each other in slogans.
I actually want to lift up, Nancy, you were talking about before what it would actually look like if this community went to Israel and made this case and took some proactive steps actually on the ground. And I want to lift up something really actually very exciting that's happening in Boston. The Tufts, J Street U and the Tufts Hillel have been working really hard together. So there's some Tufts students in the crowd. Yeah. They actually, I believe this spring break, are going on an interfaith alternative spring break to Israel and to the West Bank. They're going to Hebron with Breaking the Silence, I believe. They're going on so many, and they're going into the West Bank and they're seeing the occupation and they're coming together, not just Jewish students, Christian, Muslim students together. And I actually believe that the CJP may have pitched in some funding as well. So talk about the angels of our better nature, Mr. Sheikh.
Don't ask, don't tell.
I think it's also worth reminding folks that before the election, it felt like the two-state solution was on life support. I think it's also worth remembering that before the election, 1 in 3 black men in America were likely to go to jail, whereas 1 in 17 white men in America were ready to go to jail. And so though there is this kind of inflection point around the election and an urgency around the election, this really isn't about Republicans and Democrats or Trump versus Clinton. This is around whether we are going to be the grassroots American Jewish movement to hold our country and our homeland accountable to our values. And that will happen. And that will happen only if we lovingly and respectfully, with civility, engage deeply and with the willingness to take risk and act with courage. And I think the picture we just heard about this multi-faith mission to Israel is a good kind of an example of the way in which we need to engage.
Well, I think we're about out of time. You guys have been a fantastic panel. And I rarely see a better audience, so give yourselves and hopefully we will all come out of this meeting, this gathering, with a renewed sense of what we can do as individuals and as a movement to help bring about social justice and peace in this country, in the two countries we love. Thanks.
Amen. Amen.